Welcome to Echoes of the Unknown, the podcast where we explore some of the world's most fascinating unsolved mysteries. I'm Jack Montgomery, and today we're traveling back to the spring of 2001, when the disappearance of a young federal intern named Chandra Levy in Washington, D.C. became a national obsession. It was a story that unfolded in layers, part missing person investigation, part political scandal, and ultimately an unsolved homicide that still raises the same haunting questions it did more than 2 decades ago. Chandra Levy was born on April 14, 1977, and raised in Modesto, California. She grew up in a stable, close-knit family that valued education and public service. She was the daughter of Bob and Susan Levy, and she had a younger brother named Adam. Those who knew her described her as focused and thoughtful, not flashy, not reckless, but quietly determined. Chandra was academically driven from an early age. After high school, she attended San Francisco State University, where she earned her bachelor's degree. She later pursued graduate studies in public administration at the University of Southern California, a path that reflected her interest in government and public service. As part of her graduate work, she secured a competitive, paid internship with the Federal Bureau of Prisons in Washington, D.C. It was the kind of opportunity that could open doors. For a young woman interested in policy or federal work, Washington offered proximity to power, experience, and possibility. By late 2000, Chandra had relocated to the nation's capital. She lived in a small apartment in the DuPont Circle neighborhood. Through her work at the Bureau of Prisons, she gained firsthand exposure to the federal justice system. Her internship ended in April 2001, and she was preparing to return to California in May after completing her academic requirements. Chandra was 24 years old. She had plans. Her family expected her home soon after her graduation. Chandra spoke regularly with her parents. She updated them about her work, her routine, her life in Washington. She wasn't someone who simply cut off contact, so when that contact stopped abruptly, it was noticed immediately. Chandra disappeared on May 1, 2001. One of the last confirmed sightings in early timelines placed her at a health club near her apartment on April 30th. After that, the trail becomes uncertain. Phone records showed calls placed from her apartment on May 1st, but no verified sightings after that date. When days passed without word, her parents grew alarmed. On May 6th, they contacted the Metropolitan Police Department to report her missing. At first, the case did not receive urgent treatment. Chandra was an adult. There were no signs of forced entry or immediate violence. Early assumptions leaned toward the possibility that she had chosen to travel or needed space. But the deeper investigators looked, the more troubling the circumstances appeared. On May 10th, police executed a search warrant for Chandra's apartment. Inside, they found her purse with her identification, credit cards, and cell phone left behind. Those items are rarely abandoned voluntarily. There were partially packed suitcases, suggesting she may have been preparing for a trip home. Her voicemail box was full, including increasingly worried messages from her parents. There were also 2 recorded messages from Democratic Congressman Gary Condit of California. As detectives reconstructed Chandra's personal life, it became clear that she had been involved in a relationship with Condit. He was a married congressman representing a district near her hometown in California. Their connection reportedly began through shared political ties. When news of their relationship became public, the case transformed overnight. Cable news seized on the narrative. A young intern missing, a powerful married congressman, secrecy, unanswered questions. The investigation now unfolded under a national spotlight, Condit denied involvement in her disappearance and denied criminal wrongdoing. He later reluctantly admitted to the affair only after public pressure intensified. Condit was not forthcoming in early interviews with police, and that reluctance fueled public suspicion. In the absence of clear leads, the narrative hardened in the court of public opinion. A powerful congressman, a missing intern, and unanswered questions. But as the investigation progressed, law enforcement officials repeatedly stated that there was no physical evidence linking Condit to Chandra's disappearance. Phone records, travel logs, and witness timelines did not place him with her at the time she was last seen. In the early 2000s, the 24-hour news cycle was accelerating. Speculation filled airtime, polls were conducted, commentators dissected body language and phrasing. Chandra's disappearance became political theater as much as it was a criminal investigation. Meanwhile, detectives pursued tangible evidence. Investigators examined Chandra's computer activity. Among the searches noted were queries related to Rock Creek Park, a vast urban park that cuts through Washington, D.C. With more than 1,000 acres of wooded terrain, trails, and ravines, it can feel removed from the city despite being at its center. During the early forensic review of Chandra's laptop, a police employee who was not a trained digital forensic specialist inadvertently altered part of the search data. Although much of the information was recovered, the handling of the computer later became a point of criticism and raised concerns about early investigative missteps. As weeks turned into months, multiple searches of Rock Creek Park were conducted. Volunteers, officers, and tracking teams combed sections of the area, but the exact location where Chandra's remains would later be found was not discovered during those initial efforts. Later reviews pointed to miscommunication about how far from roads and established paths the search perimeter extended. The summer of 2001 came and went, then fall, then winter. The case lingered in uncertainty. Then on May 22, 2002, more than a year after Chandra disappeared, a man walking his dog in a remote section of Rock Creek Park near Broad Branch Creek discovered skeletal remains on a wooded slope. Clothing and personal effects were scattered nearby. Dental records confirmed the terrible news. The remains were Chandra Levy. The medical examiner ruled Chandra's death a homicide. However, due to the condition of the remains and the passage of time, the precise cause of death could not be determined. Damage to her hyoid bone was observed, an injury sometimes associated with strangulation. But the findings were not definitive enough to establish a cause. Although none of the forensic evidence connected Condit to Chandra's murder, and investigators consistently said that he was not considered a suspect, politically the damage was done. In the 2002 Democratic primary, Condit lost his bid for re-election, his once secure seat swept away by scandal, and the intense scrutiny that followed Chandra's disappearance. Once the political scandal quieted, the focus shifted to the park. Rock Creek Park had experienced violent assaults around the same time frame. One of the men linked to attacks there was Ingmar Guandique, a Salvadoran immigrant who had assaulted women in the park in 2001. In September of that year, he pleaded guilty to federal assault charges and was sentenced to prison. Years later, prosecutors alleged that Guandique was responsible for Chandra's death. The case against him relied heavily on testimony from fellow inmates who claimed he had confessed while incarcerated. In November 2010, nearly a decade after Chandra vanished, a jury convicted Guandique of first-degree murder. In early 2011, he was sentenced to 60 years in prison. For Chandra's family, it appeared the long search for accountability had finally reached resolution, but the case unraveled again. Defense attorneys challenged the credibility of key witnesses, arguing that testimony had been unreliable and potentially incentivized. In 2015, a judge overturned the conviction and granted a new trial. In July 2016, prosecutors dismissed the charges, stating they could not proceed under the circumstances. In 2017, Guandique was deported to El Salvador. Today, no conviction stands. The investigation remains officially open. What lingers in cases like this is not just the unanswered question of who committed the crime, but how so much attention, so many resources, and so many years could still fail to produce certainty. Chandra Levy's story occupies a strange space in American memory. It is remembered for the scandal, for the headlines, for the political fallout. But at its core, it is the story of a young woman whose life ended violently and whose family has lived with that void ever since. Chandra's parents fought for renewed investigative efforts. They endured public speculation and private grief. They watched in frustration as the narrative shifted from scandal to suspect to overturned conviction. What's certain is that the passage of time does not erase the questions. We know Chandra disappeared on May 1st, 2001. We know her remains were found in Rock Creek Park on May 22nd, 2002. We know the medical examiner ruled her death a homicide with the cause undetermined. We know a man was convicted in 2010, and that conviction was later vacated and dismissed. What we do not know is what happened in the critical window between her last confirmed movements and the moment her life ended. Was it a chance encounter in the park? Was it someone she recognized? Was it an opportunistic act of violence? Was there evidence overlooked in those early days? In the end, Chandra Levy's case serves to remind us that even in a city built on information, power, and influence, some truths remain buried. The headlines faded. The cameras moved on. But for Chandra's family, the silence never did. Somewhere between the noise of scandal and the quiet of the woods, a life was taken, and the full story has yet to be told. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Echoes of the Unknown. If you found this story compelling, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with fellow mystery lovers. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, the most important stories aren't the ones that dominate the headlines, but the ones that still need the truth.